Hello and welcome to AcroTales, the podcast that explores the fascinating world of acromegaly. Acromegaly is a rare condition caused by a benign tumour in the pituitary gland causing an excessive release of growth hormones. My name's Dan Jeffries and I was diagnosed with acromegaly in 2007. And in each episode of AcroTales, I'll be talking to fellow acromegalics from around the world about this unique condition and the journey that they've been on. It's episode 19. I'm very pleased to welcome Ros from Essex and various other parts of the UK. Ros was diagnosed with acromegaly in 2005. Ros, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
We're going to have a lot to get through, I sense, from all the discussions we've been having and the build up to this. But I guess, as is ever, the first question: how did you find out that you had acromegaly? And looking back, what were the symptoms and the signs that pointed to that?
So, as I'm sure listeners of all your other series of these will know, it was a winding road to diagnosis. And it wasn't an easy one. It took many years, even though I was diagnosed in my 20s. It was a long road to diagnosis. Looking back, I had signs for a long time. So piecing it together, I had joint problems as a child. I had really bad back pain. I was always seeing an osteopath or physio or somebody for sort of back pains, and it ranged from growing pains to something else. And I just kind of accepted that just joint pains was something that I had. And then as I kind of got a bit older, just other things that you just think are part of puberty, but you should have got over it by now. So really oily skin. Ridiculously oily skin and excessive sweating, which is really not good when you're kind of late teens and you think everyone else is getting over this, and mine's getting worse, much worse. Other things such as particularly for a girl, dark coarse hair growing, which you're just mortified by and you don't know what's causing it. My sister, whenever I shared a room with her or anyone else, just was like, "Oh my God, your snoring is just intense," So various bits and pieces that came along. So they sort of all felt like, I don't know, I was just continuing with puberty a lot longer than everybody else. It was really unhelpful. And then gradually other things started to happen that were completely, for me, unrelated. So I used to be a mezzo-soprano singer. I loved my singing. I was in choirs. I was doing lots of solo work. And I did a recital in a church to raise money for the church roof. And after the recital, everyone said, "Oh, that was amazing." And me and my singing teacher had a chat and she was like, "There's something not right. There's something really not right. There was something going on with my voice." And very quickly, having noticed that, I went from, for those in the musical world, I went from almost a 3-octave range to 4 or 5 notes. And my voice dramatically dropped. It's quite, people would think I'd be a tenor nowadays. They certainly wouldn't put me as a soprano. And so I went, for example, just to go and see someone. I ended up seeing an ENT specialist who, the camera's down your nose to see what's happening with your vocal cords. And they couldn't quite work out what was going on. It just seemed a bit weird. So that was probably late teens, sort of 18, 19, maybe into my very early 20s. So that was one thing that happened. The other thing that happened is real pain in my fingers and hands. So if I woke up in the morning, when I woke up in the morning, just things like opening and closing my hands, it was really stiff. It really hurt. And getting up and walking to the bathroom, I was like, my feet really hurt. It was, painful to walk. It gradually goes throughout the day, and lots of people said, "Oh, it's just water retention," which is probably not a normal thing to say to a woman in their 20s, having water retention.
No.
So I had that, and that got worse to the point where, in between my, I think between an Easter and the summer of a graduation, and I've got some photos that I'm going to send through to you, and people in the acro world will look at the photos and go, "Wow, that's," you can see it coming." But between the Easter and the June when I graduated, I bought a beautiful pair of shoes at the Easter, and I couldn't fit the front of my feet into them by the June. I mean, it was as though I'd bought a pair of shoes 6 times too small. I mean, what on earth was I thinking? I've got big feet anyway. I've got size 7 feet. So the notion that I couldn't fit the front of my feet into them. And so that was, and then so with the joints, with the, people think I went to see a rheumatologist. So they tested my joints. They thought I might have rheumatoid arthritis, but again, they just couldn't work out that something just wasn't right with it. So I'd seen an ENT specialist, and then I went to see a rheumatologist about that. And sort of those kind of areas. I did have headaches, but they were really weird headaches. They only happened really when two things happened. If I laughed hysterically, so something really captures you and you can't catch your breath and you're really laughing, I would get what my friends call a Ros headache. I'd have to stop myself from laughing. I'd have to take myself away. Just an intense headache that I thought was going to cause my head to explode. And the other time it happened is going up and down in a plane. So the change in pressure of a plane. And one time I was coming back from now, the stewardess came over to me and said, "Are you okay?" Again, just this really intense pressure in my head. But it didn't happen all the time. It just happened at those two occasions. So laughing and flying, which unfortunately I think is quite...
Yeah, and laughing, that's really unfortunate because you've got to try and curb a natural, reaction. That's really difficult.
That was really hard. But because they only happened then, I kind of you don't think anything of it. You just think that's a bit weird. And then, so the oily skin and hair continued. And again, it was one time I went to see a beautician because I was thinking, can you do something about this? And it was actually one of these people who turned around and went, "You know this isn't normal." She said, "You're not, you don't come from Spain or somewhere where dark hair and dark skin. You don't have that. You're not, you should go and see someone. Have you thought that you could have polycystic ovarian syndrome because of what's happening?" So I ended up going to see someone about that. So my GP went to see someone about that. And my GP through this, as I was in my 20s, was phenomenal. Constantly, I said, "I'm coming to you again about something. I'm so sorry. I must feel like such a hypochondriac." And she said, "No, you're not. I can see these things going on." So she referred me here, there, everywhere. And she was really good at sort of saying there's definitely something wrong. And the one thing that I think caused me to really first up the ante with this is I started it's not a great thing. So I started to have lactation, which in my early 20s, I definitely had not had a child without noticing. So I knew that this wasn't normal. And I was convinced I had something like breast cancer. I was absolutely convinced. And I went to my GP and said, "I'm either a hypochondriac or I'm dying." And she said, "You're neither. We will get to the bottom of this." So she was absolutely adamant that there was something wrong. And she kept going. We went for test after test after test, went for all sorts of exploratory things which are just unpleasant, internal ultrasounds to check if it really is polycystic ovarian or they've missed something, all of these kind of things. And eventually, as we know in the acromegaly world, it was one test that took place. It was just one. It was the IGF-1 test. It was a blood test. It was, I had the glucose tolerance test later, but it was one test. And I had family, actually, who work in the endocrinology world. And my answer, which the irony. They'll probably watch this, and I don't hold them responsible for not knowing, honestly. But because that also it's really rare. What on earth? I mean, it's so unlikely, isn't it? That I was.
Yeah, of course.
So they asked me, what was your IGF-1 level? We'll come back to the hideousness of some clinicians later, but just on this, I asked the clinician when I'd had my test done, what was my IGF level, and he said, I don't know. The scale doesn't go high enough. It was so off the chart, and so that was that. The moment you get that diagnosis, and actually, it was my GP who had got the test result first. So she called me in and I saw my GP first, which was brilliant for me because I'd had this relationship with this GP. And she said to me, "Now I know what it is. It's something called acromegaly. Do not Google it. Whatever you do, don't Google acromegaly." And she was brilliant. She handed me the leaflet of the Pituitary Foundation, which I think they must only have been going for 5 years because they're just celebrating their 30th anniversary. So they would have been going 5 years. And the literature was absolutely fantastic. And I was able to tick off pretty much every one of the symptoms of them. And suddenly your whole world comes around and goes, "This is the answer I mean, it sounds awful to turn around and say, "Yay, I've got a really rare condition which is caused by a tumour." But it is that just...
That is a very, very natural reaction. It's exactly one that I went through. You finally have an answer.
Yeah.
You can finally do something about it. It is a moment of elation. Nobody wants to be ill, but it's worse to be ill and not know what it is.
Absolutely. And it was great. And I had a lot of friends who were mortally embarrassed by the fact that I'd been a bridesmaid at a friend's wedding, and getting shoes was awful. She had said, "Oh, you and your Frodo feet." I think it was, and then she was like, "Oh God, well, I said that you had Frodo feet and you've got a tumour." I was like, "It's fine, it's all good." So, and then of course things happen really quickly. suddenly all the clinical professionals rally around you, and you have all your oral glucose tolerance test, which is the good one, the insulin stress test, not so pleasant, but you know, have all that, all the MRI scans, all of that, and it all comes together, and you get all the details. And the reason why I had the headaches is because my pituitary tumour goes into the cavernous sinus. So it didn't affect my eyesight, but it was in a really small space. So if I did anything that caused any kind of swelling in that small area, that's why I got headaches. So
Okay.
it was fantastic. I understand all, but it was fantastic getting the diagnosis. And quite rapidly, I eventually had a great consultant. So my first consultant that I saw, and obviously I won't name names here, but he was really dismissive of it. Not dismissive is probably the wrong word, but it was almost as though, and he hadn't seen lots of them because people don't see lots of them. And it was when I said, what was my IGF-1 level? Because my family member had said, what's your IGF-1 level? He'd been late for the appointment, 20 minutes late, said you Acro. I said, what's my IGF-1 level? And he went, oh, expert, are we? And turned it round, showed me. And he said, but I don't know what this means. Oh, sorry, so you're not the expert after all. And he was just awful. And from that moment, the first thing I did, which I would recommend to everybody, is I contacted various people who knew it and said, find me an endocrinologist who I can talk to, because I cannot work with this person. So I ended up with a brilliant team in Salford, in Manchester. I lived up in the northwest for a long time. That's why I've got an identity issue living in Essex. I don't quite know what I am. I ended up with a really brilliant team. And I had to say, from a female perspective, I had two brilliant female endocrinologists, and that was fantastic because you're able to talk about those. So changed immediately to great consultants who were fantastic and taught me through it. Quite quickly, the decision, I think they had me on some medication for a few months, but very quickly were like, we need to operate on this. So I ended up having, my first surgery was the beginning of December 2005 at Salford in Manchester, and went in, had the surgery, came out. 2 days later, I was shopping in Marks and Spencer's and bought a pair of size 7 shoe. It was just amazing and felt really weird, but my hands, I kind of had this excess skin on my hands where things had kind of reduced. I mean, it happened really rapidly.
Yeah. I went through all of that as well. It's very strange.
So I had that, and then, however, within a few days, the surgeon phoned me up and said, we didn't get it all. I'd had some tests, we didn't get it all. We're going to go back in. And they went back in 2 weeks later, on the 23rd of December, which, for my family, let's be honest, was a bit rubbish. Mostly because
Merry Christmas.
So mostly because most of my family live in the south, so that caused all the family to have to come and stay with my aunt and uncle. So they were delighted that we all descended, and went in and had surgery on the 23rd of December. And they had said that second time going in, a bit more risky. So they show you the scans and carotid arteries and all this kind of thing. And I went in, had the second surgery, and I had a CSF leak the second time. So that was, so obviously, as people know, so what they do to plug the CSF leak is they take a bit of fat from your stomach and put it in your nose. I did say to them, because weight gain is a big part of acromegaly, you didn't have to stick it off or stick it all up my nose, but you could have taken more out. If you get honestly. So they did that. Then they let me out, despite tests, because it was Christmas and I was going home. Staying with family members who were in the medical profession. However, I was whisked back in on Boxing Day with suspected meningitis, which I did then have. They knew it was coming. And then I was in hospital for quite a long time. I didn't come out until in the new year. But I had meningitis, which was not fun, but, it was...
I had it too.
So, but they knew what they were doing, so that's fine. And I also had, they've now called it something else, but diabetes insipidus. I had that. So my goodness, I don't really drink much water or fluids. I'm a terrible, but I was drinking the huge litre bottle. I just thought I was going to die of thirst. And then I was also obviously on hydrocortisone as well. So I had that, but they all sorted themselves out within a few weeks. And actually 6 to 8 weeks after that, I was in my 20s, so all fine, didn't die, all good, that's fine. Got a new dog, bought a house, went back to university within weeks of surgery, and attempted to continue with my PhD, which I was doing at the time. So kind of quite rapidly, I felt I'm done here. I've done this, I've completed this. This is my journey, over and done with. Acromegaly, all sussed. they left some tumour, which is very common, but they couldn't tell where it was, so they weren't going to go back in and do surgery. I was a woman in my early 20s, so they weren't going to do radiotherapy either. They wanted to protect as much of the pituitary as they could in case I wanted children, get all of those elements. So I ended up on treatment. They tried things like octreotide for a while, which was okay, but it was starting to come out of its kind of routine. That was what they were prescribing. Also, I'll be honest, having to go to a GP, a nurse every month to have an injection when you're in your 20s is really tiring, and you go, I don't want.
Yeah.
And also, they got it wrong all the time. I'd go in and sit down, and they'd shake the vial, and you immediately go, okay, we'll come back in a few days because you've done it wrong. So eventually, my consultant argued successfully back in the day, primary care trusts argued that I needed to be on pegvisomant, which was just starting in the UK to come through as mainline treatment. Very, very expensive. So it had to have that approval on an individual patient level. But excellent consultants who very good at arguing their case. And I'll be honest, I was on pegvisomant probably from 2007-8 until 6 weeks ago, and gradually increasing levels. Also something called cabergoline, which is around controlling the tumour, but also around that prolactin level. And then they had to replace from thyroxine. So I thought I got away with it pretty well. I think the recovery from those first two surgeries in my 20s, it was probably 6 months after I'd kind of gone back with gusto. I've survived, hurrah, it's all been great, life will go back to, I don't know what I thought going back to was, because I'd probably had it for a really long time. And I really hit a massive wall. I was an academic at the time, and my job was to read lots of journal articles and write essays, and I suddenly couldn't read anymore. I could read, but I couldn't retain information.
Yeah.
I really struggled, and I still struggle now. I can read in small portions, but it was that, I had to read it 4 times and then write a post-it note of what it said. So everything took so much longer.
Is that the acro fog?
It was, and
would you call it that?
Yeah, and attention span. I thought I was concentrating on something and realised I was doing something else, doing something completely different. And pretty much that marked the end of my academic career. I never did finish my PhD. I spent a long time trying to do it, fighting through that I should be able to do this, and thinking, when I look back on it now, thinking that I just passed my time of doing academia, which may have well done it, but actually looking back, I wasn't able. And I was exhausted. And I spent a long time going back to consultants saying, I'm not right. There's something not right. And I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, which, I'll be honest, is still not a helpful diagnosis because so many people don't believe in it. Even consultants don't believe in it, GPs don't believe in it. And that's really hard because they tried to suggest you should do graded activity, which is going out of fashion because the notion, and I worked. I gave up my PhD, but started a job in the NHS, and I had a really good career, not reading journal articles. I was fine at doing other stuff, but not journal articles. And I didn't want to stop doing anything and lie in bed and gradually increase. That seemed a really sort of counterintuitive thing to do, but I really struggled with, and I guess I still do, still struggle with energy levels, I think my friends and colleagues over the years know when I'm about to have a crash, sort of off the chronic fatigue crash, because I'm suddenly really productive. I do loads of stuff, like clear emails, I action lots of things to happen, and then they won't see me for a few days because I can't get out of bed. And, I could get out of bed, but then I wouldn't be able to work. So I kind of choose my elements. So for a long time, that was probably the hardest part of actually the recovery of it, in that you're recovered but you're not. You've kind of, the consultants say you're fine, your levels are within whatever the normal range, to which I still question what's normal, because no one knew what normal was before I was diagnosed. So what's normal for me? What's normal activity levels? I mean, who are they comparing me to? Because there's not many of us, so it's hard to compare like.
Yeah.
And so, but you kind of end up just getting on with it because there's nothing else you can do. No one's going to give you anything for it. It's just something that you end up carrying on with. So I guess for almost 20 years, I did just carry on with it. And I'd changed consultants because I'd moved cities, and saw a consultant for a long time who was okay. And I thought I was being, I'm sure he thought as well, that I was being well treated from a clinical perspective. But over the last however many years, things still, I was like, this, my energy levels are awful. I feel almost, I do this, feel almost as though my hands aren't quite right again. Shoes that probably should have fitted a while ago, they're not as tight as I wasn't, however many sizes bigger, but they're still not right. I had terrible problems with my hip. I ended up having a hip arthroscopy a couple of years ago. Awful problems with hip and joints and all those, and also gastro problems. Just things like, is it IBS? Is it not IBS? Is it irritable bladder? Is it not? All these kind of things that you just go, something's not right. Lots of colonoscopies. My goodness, in the acromegaly world in the UK, we get used to colonoscopies.
Did they find polyps?
Oh, tiny ones. And whilst we're amongst friends, one of them turned around and said, my digestion, my colon is shaped like a pretzel, which I thought was unique to me. But now when you talk to more acromegaly people, it's all extended and it has to fit in. So they kind of have to go roundabout, which makes that colonoscopy experience even better.
Yes.
So
thank God for gas and air.
Absolutely. So lots of things like that. It just kind of felt as though things just were progressing in a way that I thought there's something not right here. And, like 20 years on, I'm an expert at this now. So eventually, I'll be honest, I sacked my consultant. I sacked him. I felt I wasn't being listened to. I felt also as a woman in my 40s now, there were hormonal issues that I wanted to chat about that he just didn't seem that interested in. So I found myself through various family and colleagues, a brilliant endocrinologist actually at the Christie in Manchester. So went back north, even though I'm living in the south now. And the moment I started talking to her about everything, again, it was that moment of, no, this is all acromegaly. This is something that's all coming together. And when they looked at my test results, I was on the max. I'd progressively gone to the maximum level of pegvisomant you can have. And I was still, my IGF-1 levels were still high. So she very kindly said, well, we'll get the surgical team to look at it, but I think we need to send you for a fancy scan in Cambridge where, I don't really understand it. They do something to do with biology. I don't realise that. They do a fancy scan where they can tell exactly which cells are producing the excess growth hormone. I thought this is exciting. I've not had one of those. So I was quite looking forward to that, as we do. I think there should be an MRI, rate my MRI experience across the country. Looking forward to that. But I never got one because when the surgical team back at Salford looked at my scans from the last however many years, it turns out that we don't need a fancy scan. It's that tumour there that we operated on 20 years ago. It's growing back. So the scan was there. I'm not going to say whether my previous consultant had missed it or didn't know or didn't think it was a problem, but they very quickly said, this is something that we want to operate on. It's back in the cavernous sinus. It's causing problems. You're not, your acromegaly is not under control. So we need to operate. And the best course of action is to have an operation. So,
did they tell you how big it was?
It had gone back to just around a centimetre, I think.
Okay.
So that's not.
How I didn't ask you how big it was initially.
I think it was just over that initially. It must have been. I can't remember.
Okay.
In all.
So it was a micro rather than.
No, I think it was a macro. I was looking around for my
macro is 2 centimeters.
I think it must have been when I was in my 20s. Okay. They operated really quite quickly. And they operated 6 weeks ago to the day. So I got to experience surgical pituitary tumor 20 years ago, and the same team, not the same surgeon. I went for a younger one. So 6 weeks ago, had the operation again, and they wanted to discharge me the next day, which was fast. And I said no, mostly because they didn't give me I didn't have a CSF leak. I didn't have diabetes insipidus. I'm on hydrocortisone just because they put you on it. But what they did do, which I had asked the surgeon, could you really avoid it if you can? I've got double vision caused by the surgery, which I'm everything crossed that they've just annoyed some nerves, and it will be fine. But we're fingers crossed for that. So good talking to you quite close because I can see things. But anything further away, I'm rocking the pirate look with an eye patch.
Wow. How does it feel, comparing that surgery 20 years ago to what you had now? I mean, I'm guessing one of the major advantages must be what to ask. You're probably not as scared, though obviously there's always a bit of trepidation. How does it differ?
So I'm going to be in my 20s. I think I was quite gung-ho about it all. So I don't know if I don't remember them telling me all the risks of it, or I didn't listen, or one or the other. Because being told all the risks in your 40s, I was suddenly like, oh, hang on a minute. And actually, do you know what? The eyesight one was the one that freaked me out the most. I called my surgeon back and said, I really want to talk about this because I'm really worried about potentially losing my vision. I've always, I've been driving since my 17th birthday, and I've always been really independent. And the notion that I could not be able to drive really panicked me. And he said, well, we'll do our best, but it is a risk. And of course, it's the one thing I've ended up with. Although fingers crossed that the DVLA will let me drive one-eyed, and then hopefully it will go away. And also, I'm in my 40s. I've got a husband now. I don't have children, but I do have a dog, a needy little dog. I've got, nieces who are, 14 and 10. And it's things like that you just don't think about in your 20s. You don't really think about how it impacts others.
Oh.
And I guess the main thing is when I was in my 20s, being independent as I was, I went through quite a lot of it on my own. I did all the tests on my own. I don't know about anyone else, I hate having visitors in hospital. It drives me mad. I kind of quite want to stay on my own. But suddenly there's lots of people who kind of want to know what's going on and want to see you. And so I'll be honest, selfishly, it's managing other people's worries and everything else that you kind of want to turn around and go, I just want to do it on my own. But you can't, obviously. You can't and shouldn't. You need to take people with you. But I think that was harder. I think it was harder in my 40s. The one thing I did do is I've been much more engaged with the Pituitary Foundation community and the acromegaly community. And everyone is take the rest. Lie in bed. Make sure you rest for at least 6 weeks. Take it. Don't be a hero. And I've done.
Don't be gung ho.
And I'm kind of much more aware of. I don't want to hit that wall in 6 months. I've kind of hit the. I'm not sure I ever got round the wall, so I don't want to hit another one. I don't want to add a wall to the journey. So I have to. I'm going to start back at work tomorrow. Although my company are amazing, and that would be gradual, and I'll do things at my own pace. And I'm sort of doing things with the Pituitary Foundation and doing all of that, but. I don't know. I found it harder doing it in my 40s than in my 20s. The other thing, I think, it's absolutely nothing to do with the consultants and the team, but my goodness, the NHS is in a different place than it was 20 years ago. Just the communication. I still haven't seen my consultant, my surgeon. I haven't seen my surgeon since surgery.
Since 6 weeks ago.
I've seen his team. I saw his team 2 days after, but I've not seen him. And that's really different. I mean, 20 years ago, my consultant, my actual surgeon, the guy who was in charge was there talking to me, chatting through it. I also had...
At the bottom of the bed, normally, like the next day.
I mean, the specialist nurse was there and the surgeon's team was there, but not him. And then also, I haven't had any... I know now that they don't do all the tests as they used to so quickly afterwards. So I'm due in 2 weeks to go back and have all of the tests, the real test done to see what my actual levels of everything are. But 20 years ago, they were done the next week and they haven't been done. So it's difficult. And I just think that element of, it sounds awful, but that always one-to-one communication that I was so used to in my 20s just hasn't happened. And as I say, I work in the NHS and I work with the NHS and I have done for almost 20 years. And it's just, we don't, let's not get into the good and bad of the NHS. No, that's a whole other podcast to which there's lots of them. But I think it is testament to the fact that it's the NHS is in a really difficult place right now.
It's creaking.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But aside from that, still amazing treatment, amazing consultancy, amazing sense of urgency. Yeah. And, I for all its faults, I still wouldn't want any other healthcare system.
No, not at all. And I could have gone privately, actually, with the same... It did take me some time to get surgery, not actually due to them, due to things, just boring things like work. I said, I can't have surgery then. I'm
too busy.
I booked I'm on my holiday, so they sent me a date for surgery. I said, well, I can't do that date. I'm still away. Anyway, so little bits like that did cause a bit of a delay. But absolutely, as I say, I could have had it done privately, and I was looking into getting it done privately. But my instinct with that, and even though it was the same surgeon, is the fact that the NHS, I still think, is the best. If anything had have gone wrong, I still think being within the the hands and the heart of the NHS is the best place to be. Even though it's some of the same people, I just, I say I worked for the NHS for a long time and still work alongside it. It is the best place. It's creaking, there is no doubt about that. But I knew and know, because I know the system so well, I can really advocate for myself. So I was not going home on the second day, not a chance. I'm in good. My specialist nurse probably doesn't appreciate it quite so much, but I've got their email addresses. I get on well with my surgeon's secretary, so all of those kind of bits. I can be bolshy and sharp-elbowed to get what.
Well, you have to be. You have to be your own warrior and your own advocate, and if you don't shout loudly, someone
Yeah.
else will. So it's a shame that we have to do it, but this is a common thing. Having done this podcast 19 episodes, people have to make their voice known if something's wrong, because it's too serious, it's too important.
As I say, I started as an ambassador for the Pituitary Foundation at the end of last year, and trying to do more around then. But also there's a UK acromegaly Facebook group, and I think one of the things is it's such a good space for people to ask questions that only acromegaly or pituitary patients will know the answer to. So just things like, there's a weird smell in my nose. Is that normal? Yes, it is. You're starting to get the sense of smell back, and the first thing you smell is dressing dissolving. So that's normal. Or I still feel quite dizzy. Is that right? And there's lots of people who will turn around and say, no, I think you should go and talk to this person, or actually that's normal, or yes, we all have that. And I think it's also people being able to say, I'm going in for surgery tomorrow and I'm really nervous, and just the speed of which you've got lots of people who are experienced of that saying, you'll be great, you'll be fine. This was my experience, and keep in touch and tell us. And I've hopefully provided some of that support for people who've had it since I've had mine and prior to it, because I'm new again, so I don't just have 20 years worth of experience, but I've got recent experience of it. And I think it's only patients who have had pituitary surgery who can advise on what feels right, what doesn't feel right, whether steaming helps, or nasal sprays, or any of these kind of things. I think the consultants can tell you so much, the specialist nurse can provide a lot, but it's only other patients.
It's the lived experience.
And given it's such a rare condition, we've got to find all the help that we can. So, the wonders of modern technology. I mean, social media can be terrible at times, but some of these, the ability to share, I think, is just so important. And our ability, and lots of the comments and conversations are about, as you said, that being able to advocate. This doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like you've got the right consultant. Move. You have the ability to do it. Make sure you do. And people doing that. And I think it's just so important with any condition, but particularly with conditions like this, because there just isn't the expertise. So make the most of the community. I think it's really important.
Yes, I completely agree. And it's great to have another strong voice in the community too. When I organised pre-COVID, really, when we were doing acromegaly get-togethers in face-to-face, we would have male sessions, female sessions, roundtable sessions. Sometimes the women would sit in on the men's session and vice versa, because they want to know what's going on. And when I was in the acromegaly conference in the States a few weeks ago, there was some really good sessions for, again, men and women and caregivers as well, the family members who have to go through this, which is just as hard. So I think it's really invaluable that we do this. And I think the community is great, actually. And we've kind of all got each other's backs.
Yeah, it's really positive. I really regret that I didn't take more part in it when I was in my 20s, but you don't.
No. I'm gonna pull you up on this. You shouldn't regret that, because you were in your 20s. This was a brand new thing. Social media was not around and as prevalent back in 2005. So I don't think you can feel any guilt for that. The difference is, when you've been through it, and you have to go through it, then you can be a voice of authority. Can't be a voice of authority really until you've lived through this surgery and the treatments and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it really is recognizing the value of talking to other people that are going through a similar thing. I think it's fair to say that acromegaly journeys in themselves are so different. I mean, people have all sorts of different things. So, some people have all the symptoms. It's really different. So I think we equally can't be boxed into the same journeys. So I think, and one of the things that I'm now really proud of is that I have not been idle those 20 years of not being engaged in the community. I now feel, and it's one of the reasons I was really passionate about becoming an ambassador for the Pituitary Foundation and doing more of the things I'm doing now, is that with my experience of the condition and rare diseases itself, but also I've spent my years working in the NHS, working in pharma, and now working for a big data company, that I'm really using some of those lived experiences to make sure that how can we help with the diagnosis process? How can we make sure that more people are diagnosed even earlier than their mid-20s? I mean, I think more and more people are coming through. How can we make it so that people are diagnosed before they've got facial features or anything else that is going to go on for a very long time? And I know they say that acromegaly only happens after puberty. There's something going on. There's something going on earlier than that. We don't all get gigantism and become 7 feet tall, but there's something going on. It can't happen that quickly, and they're starting to understand that. It's really important that we become vocal about it, but also that recognition that diagnosis in primary care. By the time you're seeing consultants for acromegaly, my goodness, you're a long way down that journey. A lot of this needs to happen in primary care. So how do we build awareness? And the other thing that I'm just passionate about in my career as much as this is data sharing. I'm a real advocate for data sharing. I still believe that if one of those many consultants I'd seen had seen the other information, so I don't know which one, but one of them, maybe something would have tweaked in the back of their mind when they'd studied rare conditions probably for about 2 hours. Hang on a minute, swelling, big hands and feet, oily skin, something, all of it. Maybe one of them would have and I might have been diagnosed a few years earlier, but now with all of that, the ability to share, surely, and with algorithms, and I know AI can be really,
Where AI is going to play a part,
but surely there's got to be something that can really help, particularly, and it's not, acromegaly is not the only pituitary rare disease. There's lots of them across that, but all the other rare diseases, there's got to be a way that we can share data so it's not just in the hands of one clinician or one GP to have to try and piece this horrible jigsaw.
No, of course.
So,
are you aware of Medics for Rare Diseases?
I certainly am. I did some work with them when I worked in pharma, and I'm looking at how we can, because again, GPs and others have a really rough time, and my goodness, as we said, with the NHS at the moment, it's a rougher time. And the more people that have at their hands the ability to access information, be more upskilled, as well as everything else that they're trying to do at the same time, but all of those resources that could be available to just help people pull that together is really key. And so I'm really passionate about trying to make a difference in that, because I've got the connections. I've worked in all the different aspects from the NHS to pharma to now data and digital, but hoping that I can add some value to that realm of banging the drum that this needs to happen more, because the acromegaly community is growing at a speed faster than it should be. If you take the number of people that have acromegaly per 100,000, it's growing, and that can only be through diagnosis and people knowing more. Yes. But I fear it's coming because of people's access to things like social media and groups, that people are diagnosing themselves, and brilliant. But also it needs to be handled with care, because it can be a scary journey, and I think that let's take the clinical profession along with this.
I completely agree. And I think that is a perfect place to end this. So, Roz, I want to say a massive thank you for sharing your story and sharing your insights as well. I won't ask if it's been useful, but I think your desire to want to become more of an advocate is clearly evident. So this is just one other small, contribution. But if somebody listens back and hears your story and get something from it, then it's all worthwhile. So thank you very much. It's been fantastic.
Very welcome, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Not a problem. And if you found Roz's story interesting and want to hear other AcroTales, head over to AcroTales.com, where you can find the ever-expanding library of interviews. And of course, you can subscribe to the podcast to receive the latest updates. You can do that on iTunes and Spotify and on the website as well. So I just want to say another massive thank you to Roz, and we'll see you next time for another AcroTale.